Hi, this is Rich Booker, and welcome to The Rich Booker Show, real news and political talk on Radnor Studio 21. First, my political perspective. Probably the single most discussed issue for the Radnor Board of Commissioners in 2018 has been the ongoing stormwater problems and potential governmental actions to mitigate the effects of flooding in Wayne. These issues are long-running and intractable, with solutions evasive and controversial. When the town center of Wayne was founded back in 1870, there were just a couple of small creeks in the area. But by 1892, significant new development required that stormwater be stored in several reservoir areas in what are now North and South Wayne neighborhoods. By 1908, and perhaps most famously, Drexel and Childs developed the property at Willow Avenue and built directly over the previous lake and / pond area that had formed after the earlier developments in the 1890s. Contrary to the statements of some local politicians, the homes in Waynes were built long before zoning and other controls were implemented, and long before the Radnor Board of Commissioners had any say in the matter. Stormwater problems in the area have been exacerbated over the last 4 or 5 decades by continued development in Wayne and surrounding areas. And while I have not voted for them, the Radnor Board of Commissioners routinely has granted stormwater waivers from the infiltration requirement of our ordinance, adding to the problem. Waivers from the requirement of infiltrating stormwater mean more surface discharge and ultimately more flooding when those systems are overwhelmed in large storms. 2 such waivers were again granted by the Radnor Board of Commissioners for developers on December 10th at our meeting. The only permanent solution to this problem will be to reduce development in Wayne and surrounding areas and to reclaim riparian buffer and areas previously developed as open flood zone. The Board of Commissioners can and should do more to require developers to strictly conform to stormwater infiltration requirements in Wayne and the rest of the township. All too often, I am the lone voice on our Board of Commissioners in curtailing overdevelopment in the township and fighting against the ravaging effects of stormwater flooding. And that's my political perspective. Today, Mr. Matt Marshall joins me. Matt has been on the show before, and Matt is a real estate broker and development advisor working for Cushman Wakefield currently. Matt grew up in the area and has been very politically active in Radnor Township. Most recently, he served as interim commissioner for Radnor's 1st Ward. So Matt, welcome. Thanks for joining me again, and great to have you on the show and see you again. Matt, please tell the audience a little bit about your involvement in Radnor Township governance and remind them about why it's important to you and why you're such an important figure.
Sure, and thanks, Rich. And before I start, I'd like to thank Radnor Studio 21 and Kevin, our production assistant today. It's great for the community to have this resource, and appreciate all the hard work you're doing. I guess my involvement in Radnor started about 20 years ago. I grew up here. I think I mentioned to you on the last show that I went K through 12 through Radnor schools, went to Penn, did my undergrad work, and then my wife and I moved away for a while, and we came back. But I realized at that point, raising 2 children here, there was nothing more important than getting involved personally, whether it be on some of the sports teams that my son and daughter played for growing up, being part of the Planning Commission, which is where I think we've had some interaction in the past. That's on right. Some big development.
You did a great job on the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
And your son is a very talented lacrosse player in college, isn't he?
He's skilled, yeah. He was on the Radnor 2015 state championship team. So if there's, I think, a particularly important milestone in his career, it was playing for the first and only state champion lacrosse team for Radnor. So, yeah. So thank you for reminding me that.
Okay,
yeah. And I also, she would scold me if I didn't say this. My daughter, Alice, who also went to Radnor High School, was on the varsity swim team, and she participated in all those activities as well. So my wife, Bonnie, and I have been really blessed in living here and growing our family here and raising our kids here. So it's all been good, but in my opinion, it's about both giving and taking, and that's why I like to give back to Radnor.
So because you have that vast experience as a commissioner for at least an interim position, and also with the Planning Commission, you have a lot of knowledge and also with your business. You have a lot of knowledge of land use and the issues in Wayne. And one of the areas that is particularly important to you is the Wayne Town Center.
Yes.
And the Wayne Business Overlay zoning area, which is our real main business area, and revitalizing that and making that as business friendly as we can. So last time you were on, we talked about the need to revitalize Wayne and to make it a better place for commerce. And you brought up a lot of concerns about the appearance of Wayne today as kind of the background, just the appearance of what we have today. So we have some pictures to show the audience, and why don't you talk about this? We have issues with the leaves have been piling up. There's trash, and then there's also some cigarette butts and other things. So talk about that and your concerns there, and what you think we can do.
Yeah, thanks, because I think it's an important thing for the community to understand. Just taking a step back, when I was on the Planning Commission and I worked with Al Murphy and others, we were able to implement what is today the Wayne Business Overlay District. And essentially what that means is there's sections of Wayne that have been planned specifically for multi-use property. So for those of you who aren't familiar with development and land use, essentially what we tried to do is to bring retail to the ground floor. We'll have residential above, and there have been some developments, including the Bank of America building, where people actually live above the building.
Right.
So
kind of an old style of a way to live.
It's exactly how cities have always been planned. I was in Edinburgh, Scotland this summer, and the same type of uses: retail on the ground floor, residential above, and it makes for a walkable city, and it's a better amenity for the people who live in the town center.
Right.
So fast forward to today, this morning, and we'll show some of these photographs. The idea of a town center is that it's not only accessible for the residents to go out and buy their coffee or go to a restaurant after work, but it's also to get them out and actively engaging in the community. Unfortunately, what's happening is that a combination of, I would say, our business owners, but primarily the township, have given very little attention to maintaining the streetscape in Wayne. And as an example, I took some photographs right on the corner of North Wayne Avenue and 30 this morning that shows planters that are filled with cigarette butts. It's really a very, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, it's a very disturbing trend, because what we're seeing is as more investment comes to downtown Wayne, we're also, in a particularly negative way, we're displaying our streetscape. So I think, Kevin, you'll be able to show some of those photographs, but what I would like to see is a plan that I initiated with the township when I was interim commissioner, where there is an ongoing street maintenance and cleaning program for downtown Wayne. And the reason that's important is that it's one thing if you're a resident and you happen upon, Wayne, you're going out for coffee or going to a restaurant and you see the decrepit shape that the streetscape is in. But I've had business meetings in the Wayne Hotel where very high-level executives come to stay there overnight. They're influencers, they have companies that they may want to bring into the region. And for one of those people to come out on the street the morning after they've stayed at the Wayne Hotel, which is a beautiful property, and no one would refute that, to come out to the center of Wayne and see all of the trash, the leaves, and the cigarette butts that have accumulated, that's an immediate turnoff to that prospective investor and employer. And that's what I want to see end, hopefully in 2019.
So this has been an ongoing issue. You've raised it to me many times, and you raised it when you were interim commissioner. And we've discussed it quite a bit, and we've attempted to put measures in place to address these issues, but it's still not resolved, I guess, based on your discussions and pictures. So why do you think that is?
I think there's always been a tension between the business owners in Wayne, those who operate the businesses, the stores, the restaurants, and the township. And I think it's a classic example of two parties who are pointing at each other to fix the problem, but as they point at each other, the problem gets worse. So I brought this to the attention of the board and to the township manager and to Public Works. We had a plan at the middle of the year that there would be a dedicated cleaning source for the middle of Wayne. And I think given generally the amount of investment in open space in areas like the Fourth Ward, around the Willows and Skunk Hollow and their area, those are multi-million-dollar investments that the township has made to open space in a very small, remote area of the township. What I'm calling for is a ongoing street maintenance program in the center of Wayne where there are actually more people using that area as a resource.
And,
right?
and for both commerce and just for pleasure as well.
And let's not belittle the commerce aspect of it, because we talked about this at length last time. As the businesses are looking at improving their business and their revenue base, they're also competing against areas like King of Prussia Town Center, Ardmore, Bryn Mawr. Any of these areas essentially touch the same demographic in terms of consumer spending. Mm-hmm. Wayne has been fortunate for the last 100 years, as you had mentioned in your opening, where people have come here. It's been a destination. But now there's these other pockets in suburban Philadelphia where people can reach the same demographic, and Wayne is competing, and in my opinion, Wayne is losing. Wayne is losing to Upper Marion Township. They're losing to Ardmore. They're losing to
Well,
Bryn
a lot
Mawr.
of people would say that's because of the business privilege and mercantile tax being twice the amount that it is in Upper Marion. And other areas that you mentioned have no business privilege and mercantile tax. So that, to me, is probably the single biggest factor that would affect what you're talking about. But it could be other factors as well. But aren't the cigarette butts really just the kids that are sitting there with their skateboards smoking on the benches there?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think to the township's credit, they've relaxed on some of the outdoor dining codes, and I think people in Wayne, and generally speaking, Wayne has a much better reputation today. I feel people come in for the festivals in the fall and in the summer, but let's not confuse the fact that we're not at a music festival here in the middle of December. We're at a time when it's a peak retail season for our storekeepers, and there's no excuse where we have trash and cigarette butts on the street.
Have to keep it clean.
Have to keep it clean, absolutely.
In your opinion, what is the responsibility of the store owners, the people who are leasing the spaces, to maintain and police and make sure the front of their area on the sidewalk is cleaned up? Because that's an area that I get from other business owners that they say, why would we spend money to do it? Because nobody else does that. The store owner is supposed to be responsible for that.
Absolutely. So I think, in my opinion, we don't need to run an ordinance against smoking in downtown Wayne. I don't think that's necessarily where we want to be going. But I do think there are things like having those cigarette canisters, the long tall canisters that prevent fires also. So there's two benefits from those. It's one, collecting the cigarette butts, but it's also preventing unintended fire consequences, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's just a symptom of having younger people smoking and then putting their cigarette butts in the planters. I think it's just the fact that we've gotten away from having the storefronts and the owners take responsibility for their clientele and letting them know that if they have to extinguish a cigarette, it's in a canister, it's not in a planter.
We talked about the Wayne Business Overlay District, and one of the people who is really significant in the Wayne Business Association, our friend Chris Todd, has brought to the Board of Commissioners a project that he's championing for over $3 million for a revitalization and facelift for all of Wayne that would include new lighting, trees, streetscape work.
Yeah.
What do you know about that project, and what do you think about it?
Well, just going, to its founder, Chris. Chris has been probably the single most driving force of improvement to the Wayne Town Center, and North Wayne Avenue exists as it does today because people like Chris and Chuck Hampshire, Paula at Paula's Cucina have taken real pride in their businesses and have really done a great job in keeping their storefronts clean and doing the right thing for the community. But I said on the last show when I was here, Wayne needs a reset. So whether we have that budgeted through an ongoing maintenance and improvement plan, or possibly doing what Chris has proposed, I think it's time to do it.
Well, that would be a bond issue, and it would be payments over 20 years. So that would be a capital program that would actually be a capital investment.
Well, I think there's other ways to do it. In my personal opinion, and having had a lot of experience with approvals for land development in Wayne, I would like to see some of the nonprofits, universities, colleges paying into a pilot to fund some of that expense, and possibly as a condition of approving some of these larger developments of funding.
You can't condition an approval on funding.
It's a way that we can possibly
they can agree to it, but you can't condition it.
You have to ask before people will pay it.
That's right.
And I've never, in my 20 years of experience in Radnor, I've never seen it. Maybe it happens and I'm not aware of it, but I think people need to ask. We need to.
The Board of Commissioners has specifically asked the universities and colleges to work with us and to pay a pilot, and the response has been a unified no, and they've refused to do that, and prepared a report. So the universities, their view is that they contribute economically, bringing their employees and students, and that really is their contribution, and that a pilot would be unfair to them. And they haven't moved from that. And we haven't tried to test it in court, but largely there's not a lot of precedent in court to challenge it.
Yeah, and I'd say for the last 100 years or where it's been predominantly places like Eastern and Cabrini and Villanova have never competed directly with the town center. I drive by Villanova's development every day, and I know they're making space for retail. So you can't have it both ways, right? You can't say I'm not paying into a pilot and then I'm going to start taking customers away from other businesses that have to pay use and mercantile tax.
Absolutely. Very good point. So we talk about Wayne, and philosophically, I always think of Wayne as a resort town. Since 1870, it was really a resort area for the people in Philadelphia to come out to the bucolic countryside.
Right.
And really, we have Wayne Hotel. We used to have the Bellevue Hotel, and people would play croquet, and it was a summer retreat. And I still think of the town as a resort area, and I think of Wayne should be more like Vail, Colorado, say, than some type of a commerce or a bit like King of Prussia Mall. It's not a mall; it's more like a resort area. Do you see it that way, or do you see it more as a place for business and commerce, and a place where we should have more corporate headquarters? And is it something like that, or what do you see as the development of Wayne over the next 100 years?
Well, that's a good question. So the progression, you're right, has been mostly agricultural. I guess through the 1800s and into the 1920s or 30s. Ardrossan was a major driver of that, because of the size of the farm, and there were lots of tenant farmers and other things in that area. But we're not an agricultural community or economy. So as I said on my last interview, we are an inner ring suburb of Philadelphia. So as much as we don't like to wear that badge, we are. So my thought would be, let's do planning around the highest level employment, and let's focus that in areas like Radnor Financial Center, and have those employers want to be here because of the unique aspect of Wayne being, such an amenity-driven town with the restaurants, the hotels. Corporate executives like to come into areas like the Main Line because it's a very different experience than what they get when they fly into Philadelphia. So I think our position should be let's create additional commerce and economic activity through headquarter locations, but do it in a very thoughtful way.
So we talked about, I'm going to change the conversation a little bit about and talk about more about taxes. This past week, your commissioner, Jack Larkin, along with the Democrat majority on the board, increased property taxes 6%, as well as a 10% increase in the sewer rents, on top of a 10% increase from last year. And those taxes are passed on to the businesses. So in addition to the business privilege and mercantile tax, we're increasing the taxes on all of the owners in the area. So do you think those high taxes are robbing us of our hard-earned money, but also deterring business in Wayne as well?
Well, it's unsustainable, and we've had hours of conversation about this. The largest population in the United States are those who are of our age and older. So many of the people who live in Radnor are baby boomers or generations where they're coming to retirement or they're in retirement. So every time you increase the tax on the sewer bill, or if you just increase taxes generally on property, it makes it more difficult for those people to stay in Radnor Township. And there will be a flight. And I think I was very vocal with you and Commissioner Abel that tax increase, in my mind, was really the beginning of what could be a migration of people who are my age and older who want to get out of Wayne or Radnor Township particularly because of the high tax structure. Do we compete competitively with Tredyffrin Easttown? No, we don't. I have friends who live in comparable homes in terms of value. Their taxes are 50 to 60% of what we pay in Radnor. Now, we've all been conditioned to say, but Radnor provides all these services that you wouldn't get in a place like Tredyffrin. That's correct, but when the service levels are down and the taxes are up, that creates significant strain on the residents.
I think a lot of people would argue that that's not the case. Tredyffrin offers all the same services at a lower cost, and certainly the schools are comparable, or if not better, in Tredyffrin.
Well, they outsource a lot of their services. So trash you have to contract separately with a third party. They don't pick leaves up at the curb. But you're right, Rich. I mean, I think this is the way the world is going, and the public service model as it existed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s can't keep up today with the cost structure that's in place.
And I think we don't want to give up that leaf pickup at the street, at least not right now, but I hear you on these other things. So before as we wind this up, just a couple of minutes, I wanted to talk about the Wawa development that's proposed at Aberdeen Avenue and Lancaster, and get your sense of what that would mean. The Wawa that's proposed is actually outside of the Wayne Business Overlay District, just right on the border, but just 3,000 feet down Lancaster Avenue is already a Wawa, and this will be a super Wawa and has a lot of concerns of the neighbors. So what do you think about it?
Well, my experience with new development for Wawa is that it has been voted down in other communities like Conshohocken. They've decided against having a Wawa with filling stations. It's too bad that we didn't include those two properties in the WBOD, because the Wayne Business Overlay District was intended for areas like Aberdeen and Route 30, because those are walkable locations.
And there's a lot of residential right nearby.
There's a lot of residential right near, and across the street, and I was out 2 weeks ago, I took some photographs that I posted on Facebook, where there was a color guard in front of St. Catherine's Church before a Saturday afternoon wedding, and I was so amazed by that scene that I pulled over, I took photographs. You're going to lose what Wayne is when we start to overdevelop in areas like that. And somebody will say, well, what about Aberdeen Sunoco, right? It's not much better, but it's different. And we all know, because we all travel around places like New Jersey and Pennsylvania, that these super Wawas are overwhelming in terms of their scale and their light, and particularly when you have filling stations on the western end where you're right up against the entrance to St. Catherine's, and I think you know my my view on that.
So there's a lot of concern about that. There's a concern about trucks coming off, 18-wheelers, semis coming off of the highway and going to, because they will have diesel there as well.
Yeah.
So there's light concerns and the traffic on Lancaster Avenue.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and in my business, I'm all about private property rights, and if they have the certain approvals for use, and the way that they're going to develop the site, it's a function of the community coming in and getting active now to make sure whatever is proposed in that location meets with the neighboring residents and the church.
So are you a supporter or an opposer for that project as it stands today, knowing that there are quite a few limitations that have been proposed?
What I come back to is there are a lot of residents behind that location which feel to be overburdened by its scale and by the lights. And I think if we were to take a step back and say what's important for Wayne as a community, it's really protecting the people who live here and are paying taxes and are members of the community. Does it make sense to prohibit that use? No, but I think you can modify it and make it sort of more cohesive with the rest of the neighborhood.
Well, that's great, and we'll have to wrap it up right there. I'd like to thank Matt Marshall for joining me here again on the show and providing his insights. And I'd like to wish you, Matt, and the audience a very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Rich.
Thank you for coming out again. And that's all we have time for. So thanks for joining the Rich Booker Show. And remember, we have real political talk and news here on Radnor Studio 21. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.